You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Hello? Is that the famous astronomer, Sir Patrick Moore?
It is, very much so.
Any news on the space front?
Quite so. Elon Musk has just designed and developed 5 gigantic, state-of-the-art rocket ships. All members of Parliament, along with the American Senate, have first-class tickets aboard them, you see. They're told they're going to the moon.
Told? Where exactly are they going, Sir Patrick?
The new anomaly discovered recently astronomically. A huge black hole.
Welcome to Twin Souls. Twin Souls is brought to you in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Your hosts, Philip and Ronald Kinsella. Now, our next guest needs no introduction whatsoever. We have the honour of having Paul Sinclair on our show. And as most of the world in ufology and cryptozoology knows, that Paul Sinclair has done an incredible amount of research and written some amazing books. His latest, Truth Proof 4, Beyond Reasonable Doubt, is a bestseller. And Paul Sinclair is the best-selling author of the Truth Proof books, including his new one, Beyond Reasonable Doubt. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, we are in for a treat because this guy knows what he's talking about. And one of the wonderful things about Paul is not just being a lecturer or a UFO or a researcher or a cryptozoologist, but also the man knows his stuff and he deals with truth and honesty. And so let's introduce the guy himself. Hello, Paul. How are you?
Hello, Philip. Hello, Ronald. And thank you very much for allowing me to speak on your show. And you're too kind, honestly, because I think you two, and obviously it's not a self-praise group for me and for you guys, but I think you underestimate yourselves. You're professionals, really.
Bless you. Yeah, but the thing is, we connected in the most amazing ways, synchronicity, and since that time, you've really grown and developed with your work. And I know that if anyone's out there that is the first time of hearing about you, Paul, they need to go out and buy your Truth Proof books, especially Night People, which was another book that you recently brought out. But we're going to talk about your new book, Truth Proof 4, Beyond Reasonable Doubt. So what made you, first of all, write this book? Because I know this book is slightly different from the other books that you've written, because you've done an incredible amount of research into cryptozoology, most notably werewolves.
Yeah, and I think people who've heard me talk on various podcasts and radio shows will probably know what I'm going to say next. I never actually intended getting involved in the subject of cryptozoology. But, Philip, in the first book, the first Truth Proof book, I started receiving reports of something that people were calling the Flixton werewolf. And it's kind of grown from there. And as you know, it's the information sort of gathers, and the more of it you put out, and the more of you put out in a serious vein, not believing everything everyone says, but also allowing the witness to feel that they can be trusted with the information that they're imparting, you gather more. And for this book, we've got some incredible witnesses. And whereas the first book were primarily UFOs with 20% cryptids, this is probably 65% big cat sightings, cryptid type sightings, as you rightly said, werewolf type sightings. And good God, where do you start and where do you end with this subject? Because I'm not saying I didn't think there was any substance to it, but now I've spoken to all these witnesses, and they're all coming forward with very similar accounts and descriptions. And they're not after glory. They're not after any kind of fame, because as you know, Ronald, and as you know, Philip, that what comes with this subject in a lot of instances is ridicule.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it weighs down more on the cryptid type reports than it does even with the UFO reports, because at the end of the day, we're looking at something that people think about as belonging in horror films, and I suppose with every grain of a story, there's a grain of truth, and these things go back just in our area. Along the eastern North Yorkshire coast, we've got the phantom black dogs with the huge glowing eyes, and nothing seems to have changed apart from our ability to describe them slightly differently, and I still think that we're probably dealing with the same things depicted in folklore as what we're seeing today. And to give a kind of weak analogy, if you look at rock art, the ancient cave paintings, the way that they're painted is not exactly like what they look like. If we painted cows and horses running today, we would paint them in their likeness, yet early man depicted them slightly different. We can sort of vaguely make out what they are. I hope that kind of makes sense to people, because what I'm saying is the depictions of the black dogs are literally that: huge, fearsome black hounds that look a bit kind of distorted in shape and usually on four legs, because I don't know. I
mean, it's interesting you said, Paul, about folklore and how the cryptids are more ridiculous than UFOs, but I think that's shifting now, because people like yourself, pioneers like yourself, are actually explaining to people that this high strangeness is somehow connected with the UFOs. And if we look back at the past, the werewolves, although they were portrayed in folklore, they may well have been true, because there's no smoke without fire. So these things we do believe have been seen before. So you're absolutely spot on that. And I think more people now are reaching out towards an acceptance of this, because there is a lot of stuff on this planet that cannot be explained.
Yes, and you make a great point. Just because we cannot explain it does not mean that it's not happening, does not mean it's not real. I kind of bang on, just jumping from the cryptids for a moment, because I think it's important, about these lights that are seen over the sea, because the lifeboat logs and the Coast Guard logs, almost every year, I don't know about the most recent ones, because everything's become digitized and you don't get to see the logs like in decades ago.
Yeah.
But they've all got reports, or the older logs have, from at least 8 years ago. Every year, numerous reports of call-outs to these lights. And we've got to understand that if Maritime Coast Guard Agency think it's important enough to launch a lifeboat because they think a plane's come down or a boat's in distress, then something tangible, something visually real has been seen. Yet they can spend 4 hours, they can spend 9 hours, they can spend all night out looking for these things, multiple lifeboats from different areas, and find nothing. But because they can't explain it, they just conclude it's a false alarm with good intent. And that's kind of just jumping back to what we've just said. Just because we can't explain these things just does not mean it's not happening. It's real. There's a real phenomena taking place. In this book, I write about the gamekeeper at a place called Stape in North Yorkshire, and an ex-Marine, and he'd found an abandoned farmhouse which he was essentially sleeping in most of the time. He were closer to his work, and young man in prime of his life. I suppose he thought it was just a wild adventure. I don't know, but basically there were no running water. There were just a well and an old fireplace in this abandoned house, and that's where he was, this farmhouse. But coming home to the farmhouse, and this will tie in with the light form phenomena, his cousin had come to stay with him for a few days, and they're walking up a logging road in between 10 and 11 at night, and a sphere of white light the size of a football or slightly larger just sprung up from the side of him went into the sky because he thought that they'd activated a tripwire flare with his military experience, and he expected all the area to light up around him and squaddies to come out on a training exercise. It didn't happen. So, and next day he went looking for magnesium burns on the ground, even though he realised it weren't a tripwire flare. But what I'm getting at, from that initial sphere of light experience, this guy then, Jeff, he started to hear an infant crying in the forest, him and another gamekeeper, because his cousin left, not out of fear, he only stayed for a few days. And he said we'd go to the edge of the forest and it'd stop. And it was as though we were being lured in. He said, and then I'd be chopping wood up for my fire around the farmhouse, and it was almost as though somebody were on my shoulder watching me. I could feel the presence. Now, this guy's very imposing, and I mean, in a good way, I've consider him a very good friend now since getting to know him. But what I'm saying is, he's not the kind of guy that's easily unnerved. And a short time afterwards, he's laid in the farmhouse in a sleeping bag on the floor in front of the fire, dying embers of the fire. Wakes up. He doesn't know why he's woken up. There's no electric to this property. Nothing. Just say that in case, anybody thinks, there's the lights on or anything. There's just the dying embers and the room's dark. It said, and this thing just came to the window. I'm trying to give you the impression, the listeners, because there's nothing in this house. There's nothing. It's been derelict since 1956. And this was 2002 when he had the experience. Now, Jeff's a very, very big, broad man. He said this thing just filled the window and it was stooping down, looking in under the lintel. So we measured it when we went up there, and it made it over 7 foot tall. He couldn't see no distinguishing features, so we're not going to say we saw teeth and glowing eyes. Just give it as he saw. Backed away. And after, he said he watched for about 5 minutes and backed away, and Jeff had an uneasy night. The back door was only barricaded and there was a bolt on the front door. But being the man he is, I don't know whether it was the next night. I think there's no confusion. It's 20 years ago, but he don't know whether he waited a few days or whether it was the next night. But he went out into the forest when he'd finished his daily routine, put a tarp down just on the edge of the forest in front of the farmhouse, which had been about 30 to 40 feet away. It was forest all the way around it. He'd worked there a few years and never even knew it was there, this farmhouse. He just stepped into this bit of woodland one day and thought, what the hell's this? There's actually a house here. And he waited and waited. And in the early hours, this thing came out of the forest. And there's so many elements to this, Ronald, that take it away from for me personally, from the flesh and blood creatures that, I don't know, the Bigfoot hunters in America want them to be, thinking there's breeding populations. I'll put my hand up, I could be wrong. But he said when it travelled down the farmhouse, and this, if you can picture these old farmhouses, old white stone with red old clay pan tiles, and he said it was as high as the fascia board on the lower buildings, the gutter level. But it didn't walk. He said it just arrived. He said it was just like it were on a conveyor belt. His analogy was if you swept a torch beam down, it just went down. So we've got no movement, no body movement, but it's the shape of a huge bipedal animal. He said it stood at the window, looked in. He thinks it knew exactly where he was. He can't explain that. There's no mind speakers that people talk of with this, but stayed there 5 minutes and went back into the forest. He said he had an uneasy night. He left. I don't know. Jeff doesn't know whether he lasted 2 days or a day after, but he left. He didn't have his own transport, and his mum and dad come and picked him up, and that was his experience. But what's interesting, what Jeff never knew was that just 6 miles away in Dalby Forest, Tony Dodd, you guys will remember Tony Dodd.
Oh, yes.
Well, Tony was actively researching strange creatures in the forest, animal and human fatalities. So, I mean, Tony's written extensively about this in 1997, 98. And I thought, what a coincidence that he was researching and lecturing about this. And 6 miles away, here's a young gamekeeper who's actually had a monumental experience. I mean, he'd have been a brilliant witness for Tony back then. So it's never gone away. Whatever it is, it's resident to the area. But I don't know what you guys think, but I'm curious.
Well, I think. Well, yes. I mean, this is credible material. It's quite frightening, actually. This is why you have such a wonderful way of portraying this, Paul. That's why your books are so popular, because you have this real comfortable way, logical, of just portraying the facts, and that I believe absolutely. Hearing you speaking about that, I absolutely believe that incident. Yes.
Wholeheartedly, I think that as researchers, and I think you, Ronald and Philip, I think you're the same. Obviously, you'll get reports. I'll stay with what we were talking about in a minute, but just to digress for a moment, you'll get reports where you're a little bit dubious, but you'll still not be rude to that witness. You'll just sort of let them down gently and just not pursue it. But I think as researchers, and that's essentially what we are, researchers and experiencers in your guys' case and my own. But that's what drives you. I know what drives you to look for the detail, and that's what drives me. But as researchers speaking to witnesses, if we've got somebody who we consider credible, then we have to put our name on the line and back these people, because they haven't got no one else, and we know it's not a life and death scenario, but they're placing their trust in us, and I've got 100% faith in that gamekeeper's story, as I have with the guys from the nearby Broxer Forest. All these forests are linked. You've only got logging roads and country roads between most of it. So essentially, apart from the divides, the little villages in some of these places, the forests are linked. They're just split up into different names. You've got Silpho Forest and Broxer. Silpho is where, somebody will correct me, but I think it was 1957, November 1957, that the alleged Silpho saucer fell from the sky.
Oh,
yes.
There's a lot of people purported it to be a hoax, and maybe it was. I can't understand what anybody had gained from saying that they found a tiny flying saucer on Silpho Moor. I'll tell you what's interesting, and it's kind of I won't say a dig, but it kind of tells you about the real UFO researchers of yesterday and today. I went to Silpho, let me just think, late last year, and did some filming with Les Drake for Wolflands, but whilst there, because there's only, I can't remember, I did note number of hours, there's only about 16 houses, so we did a bit of door knocking. One example, this lovely lady and her husband, they said, when you live in Silpho, you never leave. And it is beautiful. It's absolutely idyllic. And you're looking at the top of this moor, about 500 foot, and they're looking onto forest tops. It's just a wonderful place. We probably hit it on a nice warm day, so it made it feel even better. But that's what they said. So when we got talking to the locals who remember the Silpho saucer, no researchers ever knocked on their doors and asked them about it.
Good Lord.
So
that's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, and so and that would include Tony Dodd, who I had a lot of respect for. I spent a bit of time researching an aircraft case with Tony, and but no researchers of the day ever visited that place. And one part of it I don't understand, because we've only got this few sparsely populated area. And it's a single track road up to it, and you've got two ways. It's one road in and out, basically, so you could come from either direction. It was found during the night by 3 men allegedly driving their vehicle. Mm-hmm. But the 3 men didn't live in Silpho. Where would they be going? There are lots of elements that point to it being a hoax. And I know we've jumped here, guys, and I do apologise, but there's other elements about the copper sheets that were found inside it that are still a complete mystery, because they were wafer thin, and each copper sheet contained 3 copper sheets laminated together, and they don't quite know how that were done even today. So it is interesting, the Silpho saucer. But jumping from that, we've got Silpho, we've got Broxer Forest, where the 3 guys from Rotherham, wild camping, encountered what they can only describe as a werewolf. And interestingly, Broxer, we stay with that name, in mythology is a shapeshifter.
Yes.
You know, and you think to yourself, how's the forest got the name of Broxer? You enter Broxer Forest via a place called Hackness. Now, in older times, Hackness was called Hachanos, which means with the whiskers. You know, and you've got all these weird connotations. That we do know that in ancient times, wolves would have roamed those parts. You know, I think it was some of the last strongholds of the wolf were in North Yorkshire. Do you know, like Flixton?
Yes.
We've got the name. Athelstan said that there would be a certain part of Flixton that will be forever called Wolfland. Do you know the king?
Yes, absolutely.
You know, and the words for Athelstan's refuge that he had built at Flixton, it was at Spittal Corner, so it was called Carman's Spittal, which will be that'll be their word for a hospital, to protect travellers from an infestation of savage beasts. He said wolves and savage beasts. It's a play on words, Philip, because I'm saying wolves. We know wolves would have existed, but it was built in 937 AD. There were no bears in the United Kingdom in 937 AD. So I ask, what were the savage beasts? Wolves and an infestation of savage beasts. And I find that fascinating, because it's on the Flixton Cars, the wetlands, that all these reports have come from ancient times to today. And when I spoke to Professor Tim Brennan, who's got an avid interest in the ancient people that inhabited Flixton Starcar. Anybody listening to this wants to do a bit of research. Starcar is a fabulous archaeological site where they found some of the most amazing artifacts in the world, that sort of buried in the peat of the ancient lake bed. But they discovered things that pointed in the direction to the inhabitants of Starcar being shaman, and they found evidence of mass animal sacrifice. So I'm not an authority on shamanic practice, but I do realise that it's supposed to be the transformation into the beast. So based on that, if they'd got some knowledge that's been long lost, is something akin to the Flixton werewolf a remnant of those ancient times? You know.
Yes. Yeah, fascinating. And, you know, although the other thing I'll say here, Paul, is that what's interesting is that, you know, if we go into areas of, you know, what people call mythology, we discover that, you know, it isn't so much mythology, that there is truth behind it. And also words, spelling. It's almost as if maybe perhaps on some level, our consciousness or a united consciousness is able to create a spell through names or through rituals. This is only, you know, we have no proof of that, but certainly with the investigations and research that you've done, and it also mirrors incredibly Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, because you find that these areas, these unique areas around the world, and, you know, you've got your territory, Paul, which is Bempton, and all the areas there, and these you know, very derelict places, overgrown places. It's interesting how the phenomena isn't really, you know, located within built-up areas. It's normally in, you know, rural sacred areas. I find that really very interesting.
It is, and as you've just said, the word spell. We're somewhat subdued by science and academia,
yes.
and the fear that what we say is going to be frowned upon, because all I've got are witness testimony, and that's all most people have, because apart from leaving a massive imprint in the mind of the person who's experienced whatever it is, be it UFO related or something other, we're not carrying anything away with us. But these locations, like we've sort of identified a hill at Bempton, and it didn't instantly trigger with me that this location has been the place where many things have happened for a few years, really. And then when you started putting it together, and I've called it Unassuming Hill, because that's all it is. Just to give you a few examples, Bob Brown, who we all know, he comes up onto the cliff tops with me, and it was a daylight sighting, well, summertime, early evening. Mm-hmm. And he's going to take a picture of a kestrel on the hill. And as he's taking the picture, one of my daughters, Gemma, was staying with us for a few days, and she was with him. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. As he's taking the picture, a large black, like globule shape appeared on the hill. The crop had been cut, so it weren't that obscure. And he looked and just snapped the picture and took this. And he's got it. He's got this picture. It shows a large dark brown blob. Now, me and Gemma went straight up there. It probably took us, 3 minutes at the tops. It's not that far away. And there's nothing but farmland and open land at the back. There was nothing there, but sure enough, Bob's got this shape. The same hillside, back in 1998, a rock angler. First of all, let me just jump back a bit. I was told, because it applies to this story, by the son of a rock angler several years ago that his dad witnessed a spaceship land on the cliff tops at Bempton.
Very strange.
And they all left the fishing tackle, or a lot of the anglers. They don't all fish together. It's not like round a pond. They're hundreds of yards apart, and but they saw it and left the gear and did a runner in 1998. Well, myself and Bob were on the cliff tops in 2019, and this angler came up in the night with his headlamp on, and we got talking to him, and he said, "Oh, you're the guy that looks into UFOs." Call him Mick Sigson, really nice guy. Mm-hmm. Told us he'd fished the cliff tops for 49 years. This would be his 50th year.
Blimey.
So, yeah. And they're only allowed to fish in winter because there's a seabird colony there during the summer months. Back to my point, I asked him if he'd seen anything unusual. He said, and he where we were sat, our backs to this hill, he said, "I saw a spaceship land on that hill." So I knew first of all, I'd only got the son's account, so it weren't a first-hand account. But now I was speaking to somebody who was there that night with that rock angler.
Yeah.
He said, "I'm fishing, doing what I do." He said, and I turned round, and he said, and I thought, what was a combine doing on that hill in November? And he could date it. He said it were a club match, and it were November 1998. He said, and then I realised it's in sky. I can see a band of sky between it. He said, and it slowly descended, and then the ground around it began to spark and flames. He says, and I left the cliff top. So we'd got that one. So that happened on the hill.
Yes.
Then myself and a very good friend, Lee Hayward, Lee wanted to go up to disprove what I were looking at. And I don't mind anybody wanting to do that. If they're respectful and they think that they can solve it, then go for it. And Lee's a lovely guy.
What's strange about that, Paul, is amazing, is that you were in that vicinity and Bob took the photograph of this strange thing in the area where this UFO a few decades earlier had been seen landing. It seems to me that every time, or more or less, these UFOs are sighted, it is always more than not followed by this area of
high strangeness.
I would agree. I really would agree with you there, and it's the fact that I don't know what you and Philip consider yourselves as UFO researchers or researchers of all things unexplained. I'd like to say multi-phenomena research that I'm looking into, although they might not directly interact with one another, because I've got no proof of that. I know there's some Bigfoot researchers that believe that they can transform into spheres of light and all sorts of things, and it could be true, but I've no proof of that. Mm-hmm. But although I've no proof of them interacting, it's almost like they've got some symbiotic attachment or working relationship with the location. The location is igniting the phenomena or allowing the phenomena to manifest. You know, because it doesn't stop there. I mean, I don't know how far you want me to expand with this hill, because there's a few more.
Oh, yes, please, Paul. We'd love to hear about it.
So we'd got the Rock Anglers account. We'd got Bob Brown's, and I'm trying to think. It was it was August 2019. Then, what's interesting, on February the 8th, now I'll do the Lee Hayward one in a moment, but on February the 8th. 2019. And why do I know this? Because I've just been putting it together for one of these presentations. Bob and Gemma and myself went up onto the cliff tops. Now, it was dark, and we were at a stand called the Lookout in front of the hill. You've been to these places, Ron and Phillip, so you've a rough idea what it's like.
Yeah.
Yes.
When the day you came, you took a left and went up the cliff tops. We take a right and go further down. So anyway, I've got cameras facing the sea, not on, and the setup. And I heard Gemma, my daughter, say to Bob, "What's that light there, Bob?" And she'd got my powerful torch, and on the hillside, she'd lit up. I didn't see it. They're only Bob and Gemma saw it. She'd lit up a glowing square of white light. From what they've described, it's kind of akin to the slightly oblong that you'd see on a runner on his vest, when the marathon runners. I don't know why I picture that, but when Bob sort of gave me a rough shape of it. So he said, I think it's a board on a post, Gemma. And obviously being familiar with the area, went, hold on, no, it isn't. So he put his torch on it. They both say when both torches hit this glowing light, it just dropped to the floor and vanished. What I find interesting, because I've been listening to, you touched on Skinwalker earlier, and I think they called it the hitchhiker effect. So I don't want to claim any of this. But that night, so Bob and Gemma have seen this, that night, Gemma stayed up watching a film. Obviously she's staying at our house, and we'd gone to bed. And when I got up the next morning, she said, "I nearly come and woke you up, Dad." I said, "Why?" Bearing in mind, people, she's got no interest in this. Basically, she was staying with us. It were more like a couple of weeks, to be honest. She was staying with us, and I think it were better than watching TV soaps with her mum to just come and have a bit look in the darkness with me and Bob, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
She's not. Her head's not wildly enthused with unexplained phenomena. That's what I'm getting. She said, "Well, I'm watching TV." She said, "It's after midnight." She said, "It's in between 12 and 1. So we've gone over to the 9th of February, which is interesting when I tell you what's going to follow in a while." So she said, "I thought I could hear thunder." She said, and I'm looking round. Now, I've converted this property into 3 really nice flats, and they're all soundproofed. And the lady, Wendy, who lived above for about 7 years, had moved out, so there were nobody above. She said, and there's only Bob in the top flat, Bob Brown, and he's like a mouse, quiet as a mouse. She said, I looked round, I couldn't see anything, so I've muted the TV. She says, and then I realised it was right behind my head, and the sofa she was sat on is next to a brick wall. It backs onto a brick wall that goes into a passage within our property, so it doesn't belong to anyone else's. She said, and it's right at the back of my head, and it's growling. All my insides, I can feel them rumbling like the bass of a rock concert. She said, I'm terrified. She says, and it's just the most horrible. She claimed it were like demonic. She said, and I'm thinking, my dad's going to come in a minute. Somebody must be able to hear this. Well, we never heard a thing, and I'm a light sleeper. So that story after the square of light that night. But what I find interesting, a few hundred yards from where she saw the square of light, and I think I've got my dates right here, this was 2020. If I said 2019, people, right, for Gemma, it was 2019, Lee Hayward. This is 2020. Mm-hmm. But a few hundred yards from where she saw the square of light, and then it fell over onto the 9th, where she had this strange growling noise at the back of her that were really loud. February the 9th, 2019, the paratroopers saw what they perceived to be the werewolf on the cliff tops.
Oh my goodness.
So we've got date, location kind of repeating itself. Now, myself and Lee Haywood, let's jump back again to 2019, and it was November the 14th, 2019. Lee had come up, not to disprove anything in a clever way, because he's just a big, gentle giant, a lovely guy, but he thought he were going to be able to explain to me what I was looking at. And we're going up Cliff Lane, this single track road. Once again, I know you guys know where it is. And he said, what do they look like, these lights then, Paul? Describe them to me. And it sounds corny. I looked out of the window, and to my right, I said, like that. And there's a sphere of orange light in the sky. So Lee, being what he is, he just noted the time and looked at it. And he didn't say at the time, but he said to me then, he said, I don't know what that is. We unpacked his gear, we went onto the cliff tops, and these lights appeared over the sea then another 4 or 5 times, and each time Lee documented them, and it was November the 14th, 2019. Now, once again, I've got cameras facing wrong direction, looking out to sea, and I turned round to speak to Lee, and in the field with us, on the lower part of the hill, a huge sphere of, it looked like molten lava was there. Les has done a depiction. Once again, people, I do realise I'm saying this, and there's going to be people listening and thinking, sounds too good to be true. How's he seen all this? I can only say what we've seen. I spend hours and hours up there, people, and I'm speaking, and over months and months and months, and see nothing. And as I'm bringing the cameras round and trying to fire them into action, because I usually have them covered up, because you've got the sea air, the salt air, it ruins cameras. This thing's imploding, and it's gone. And he's gobsmacked. That converted Lee instantly. But before we end this, during lockdown, so we'll come forward now. When you were allowed to go out, take a bit of exercise, myself and Bob found ourselves, it'll tie into Lee's story, on the cliff tops. We parked up at a farm, a farmer we know, and walked across, set 2 chairs up, cameras up, and we sat. It was lovely because we'd been trapped in the properties. While we're there, a guy comes down with a dog, pointer dog, and asked us if we're looking at the seabirds, because it weren't dark, and we just had a conversation. We didn't say anything what we were doing. Off he goes towards Flamborough, and he comes back about 30 to 45 minutes later, and it's getting dark, and he's curious because we're still there. We told him that we'd been looking for these lights over the sea. He explained. I'm rushing this because I can see the time's flying, guys, and I don't know whether you want to ask me something.
No, you carry on, Boris. It's your show.
Yeah, well, he told us he lived in Reeton, which is about 4 miles away, and he'd got windows overlooking the sea, and he'd never seen these lights that I was describing. But he were polite, not condescending. He were okay. So as he left, Bob Brown said to him, "Have you seen any unusual animals?" And he went, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, there's been a big black cat seen up here." So he tells this dog to sit down. He says, "I'm going to tell you something. I haven't told my wife." He said, "But last year," he said, "I walked along the beach from Reeton towards Speeton, which would be about," sorry, all these names kind of rhyme, people, "a mile and a half from where we were sat." And he said, "My dog's really clever," he said, "and if it sees a rabbit, it's a pointer dog, a hunting dog." He says it stands different to if it sees a pheasant. He says, "And I can't work out what he's seen because he's acting peculiar." He says, "And I look up onto the hillside halfway up, and the cliffs go in a gradient from about 30 degrees, 45 degrees, and they slowly just become vertical to 420 feet. But he's on the 45-degree-ish stretch. So I see this animal on all fours." He says, "And I grab my little binoculars and I look at it." He says, "And there's a full moon." And I've just said that, people. I'm not linking any of these cryptid sightings to full moons. Most of them have just been on normal weather conditions and days. Yeah. So he said, with that, it stood on 2 legs. He says, "And I can see it silhouetted in the moonlight." He says, "And I'm looking at it. I don't see teeth. I don't see glowing eyes." He says, "It turned and went on 2 legs over the cliff top." So he told us this amazing story. But what I find most amazing, he said it was a full moon in November 2019. That was November the 12th. That was 2 days before myself and Lee Haywood saw the huge sphere of light on the hill.
Good Lord.
So have we got some kind of correlation? I find it fascinating that, I
was just going to say that they are connected. There's something where, like the full moon, it doesn't seem ridiculous, Paul, because this thing, all this energy, this entity, or this intelligence, it hones in on folklore. It's always the way. And it seems to know, like you said about the gentleman in the farmhouse, it knew he was there.
Yeah.
It knows he was there, trying to lull him in with the crying voice. You know, it plays, it toys with you. It's quite nasty to a degree.
It's almost as though it's teasing you, isn't it? You know, but the area's got so many aspects to it that are that are quite, well, you just said the word nasty. There's some bad elements. You know, I highlighted a month. An actual date of June the 15th, where a lot of things have happened in and around that area. You know, aircraft crash, 1998, June the 15th. 2020, similar area, June the 15th. Cessna, that were never found, must have crashed into the sea, June the 8th in that area. The reason I say it was in the area, it should have been flying inland, because I looked at the accident report, and there was a trawler out off the coast, and one of the crew members, who happened to be Tom Quinn, who retrieved the navigator from another aircraft, said to his crewmates, "I've just seen a man in the sea." Now, this is like in between 6 and 10 miles out. And they'd sort of, I won't say they didn't believe him, but there's just simply no chance. And it's in June, and it's on June the 8th. But they humour him, and they sail towards where he says he's seen it. And sure enough, there's a man in the sea. They get him on board the trawler. He's in a bad way. Poor man dies before the rescue helicopter can get to him. But the interesting part for me, and I don't mean the entertaining part, because we're dealing with a fatality. The interesting part is that aircraft should not have been flying over the sea. They never found the aircraft, so they don't really know how he come to be in the sea.
Oh God, I think I know what you're. Yes,
yeah.
June the 15th, 2011.
Yeah.
The wallabies got decapitated in Soby Hall little animal park. But it were like a tripwire, because wallabies got decapitated in many animal parks around the UK.
Was this the wallabies? Were they also Australia, Paul?
Well, yeah. When I looked into it further, I mean, my only starting date for this particular case was the first decapitation, which appeared, the newspaper report was something like June the 28th. And when I looked, I went and spoke to we'll jump to the Australian ones in a moment, Philip. When I looked at it, years later, I saw it, I thought, this is unusual, because, decapitation. And back in my mind, somebody had told me that it were an absolutely clean cut, but a fox was blamed. So I went and contacted the head zookeeper, and sat in his office, and he told me, he said, well, the first one was decapitated, and he said it was June the 15th. And after that, he said, another 4 were done in consecutive days. He said, and we'd got 1 left, and we rehomed it for its own safety. So then when you do a little bit more research, and anybody can do this, it's not unique to Paul Sinclair. Although the actual Soby news report used to be online, and I can't find it anymore, but I have it. But you'll find a lot of information relating to the decapitation of wallabies, namely Bennett's wallabies as well. The largest of the small kangaroos.
Yes.
And fox has been blamed in most of them. So then I extended the research. And it turns out that in New South Wales, on the Emerald Coast and the Coffs Coast and other places, that year, in those particular months, wallabies were being decapitated. And newspaper reports there were blaming a fox, but a little tongue-in-cheek comments were coming out that we're looking for a fox with a samurai sword. I'm not saying, guys, that it's alien related, but what I am saying is it's highly unusual. There's something happening on another level. Yes. And I haven't got an handle on what it is that's happening, but at least if we're identifying it, we're highlighting the fact. And it's hard to just disregard. It's hard to bypass it and say, oh, it's nothing, when you actually present that kind of evidence. It's not evidence with proof, is it? But it's evidence of something.
Yeah, well, your research, and your books and your dedication to the subject matter, I think what you're doing here, Paul, is where a lot of researchers from the past were like containing most of the subject matters into little boxes. You're beginning to, try and create a common denominator between one and the other one, because if you look at these strange areas, especially your turf, and your investigations around the world, look at the Bermuda Triangle, for instance. I mean, pilots used to go through there and they lose time, and they even said on some occasions that their environment completely changed. Some planes found themselves further ahead of time, which is incredible. But you'll find also that UFOs were seen, or USOs, unidentified submersible objects were seen under the ocean, as well as all this time displacement. And I think this is why a lot of researchers, give up, because they can't put the pieces together. But what's interesting with you, Paul, and it has to be said, is that you are beginning to put, the pieces together. Although you say you don't have an idea, I mean, does anyone? But you've done a lot more research in encompassing not just the UFO subject, the light formed phenomena. You've encompassed all these areas, and it's the lights that, I said before that as like mediums, for instance, they see lights, the different colored lights, they're smaller. And then, of course, people that see UFOs, UAPs, they see these lights that, completely mesmerize people, and they seem to distort time and space. I mean, you've done all the research on those, especially with the lights that were seen.
Or they could transform into things.
Yes,
as well.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, the werewolves are not as fantastic as aliens. Yeah. I mean, when you look at it in that respect, they are all as amazing as each other.
I would totally agree, Ronald. I really would. And what intelligence is at play here? Because we're describing these cryptids. We're describing something essentially that's living out in the open, in wild forests or on cliff tops. There's nowhere for these things to hide on the cliff tops. We know we've got loads and loads of sea caves that aren't accessible, but I seriously don't believe that these things have managed to cling to existence in that way.
No.
I think there's an extra element. There's another type of. Is it intelligence, or is it just some special ability that these things have?
Yes,
I think it's intelligence, and I think you see because you relate this before this incident with this chap with this pointer, the werewolf on the full moon. Yep. So this intelligence knows our history, it knows our past. You see what I mean? And you're bringing this to light yourself, Paul.
And you said also, Paul, you said that when you become aware of it becomes aware of you.
With the hitchhiker with his daughter.
But that's interesting. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's what goes with many aspects of the phenomena, as well as this kind of lower silence that people experience during an encounter, during a sighting. With the making of Wolflands, you'll have interviewed people UFO related and said suddenly everything went quiet.
Yes, absolutely. And that happened with both me and Ronnie on the 9th of April 2016 with the appearance of those huge circular UFOs. There was no one around, and it was like everything was quiet. I understand completely, Paul. So
what do you guys, just to turn tables a little bit, what do you think's happening there when everything goes? What I'm meaning is it the UFO that's altering our environment, or are we actually in some kind of altered environment, some kind of time shift? I don't know what the word is for it.
I think the reality is shifted.
Right.
We are placed into a kind of
bubble,
a different kind of reality, just on the edge of ours. We're pushed into it. I don't know. It's only a hypothesis. What's yours, Philip?
I think that this phenomena, this intelligence, this force, whatever it is, seems to connect with certain individuals for, unknown reasons, but certain people seem to be selected. But I also have the feeling, although, I'm open to all forms of, suggestions, but it felt to me like the force had deliberately come in and altered our perception of reality. Because do you know what was really weird about that experience on the 9th of April 2016 at exactly 11:15 p.m. at night? And there was another tracking of these UFOs, but someone tried to make it fit with ours, and they were
we weren't
dupes.
having
We
it.
weren't
We weren't
having
having it.
Okay.
But what happened was that there was no one coming down from the pub. There was no cars driving down the little road that we're on. There was absolutely no one. And Ronnie also, brought this to my attention, was that, when it's just snowed and you get that kind of muffled feeling.
Yeah.
That's what it was like, because I was shouting out in excitement saying, "Oh my God," and Ronnie was trying to hush me up.
I was calm.
But
it was like when it had been snowing.
Yeah.
And you talk or shout, it sort of kind of rebounds, doesn't it?
But one of the things is, when they went off, oh my God, when they moved, the movements they made, you, again, like yourself, you've had many experiences, you've done the investigations. It's like a drug. Once you have this happen to you and the system we serve tells you, no, this doesn't exist, and you're like, well, either I'm lying or the system's lying.
Yeah.
When you see this phenomena happening, it changes something in your soul. It's fascination, it's fear.
That, yes.
You know that, Paul.
You're absolutely right with both of you with what you've said there, because like I touched on earlier, the countless hours that myself and Bob Brown spend up there for no reward, but you once you've been touched by it, once you've had that experience, you realize it could happen. And it's not that'd be a massive word to say, it's almost biblical, but it's just so far out of what mainstream considers real that you want more of it. The
Holy Grail.
Yeah, it's and what you talked about, when it's been snowing and you've got that kind of disjointed reality.
Yes.
The dislocation, should we call it, of reality. There's a ex-South African military guy who lives. I think he lives in not that it matters, but I think he lives in. Oh gosh, why am I finding out where he lives? Let me tell you the experience. He were at Bempton with his wife, and Burton Fleming, that's where he lives, which is fairly close. And as they've only gone to look at the seabirds. It's a beautiful hot summer's day, and there's the old derelict RAF base to the left of him, and he says, and it's teeming with people up there. He said, now look, and there's what I perceive as something that's grey, a slight sheen on it, looks like a huge barrage balloon above one of the old derelict buildings. He says, and I'm thinking it must be tethered. It's low. He says, and we're not next to people, so we're pointing while we're on cliff tops, because me and my wife can see it. He says, nobody's looking at us. It's like we're not there. He said, we're looking at this thing. He said, and we decide to walk up the side of the field, not in the RAF field itself, but up the side of the field, at the side of it, to get a closer look. He says, but all the time I'm gesturing, look at that, look. He says, and nobody's taking any notice of us. He said, and we just took his eyes off it, and when we looked again, it had turned white, brilliant white, and it was lozenge shaped,
Yeah.
And we carried on walking, and we're trying to bring it to people's attention, and eyes go off it again, and we look, and it's gone. Where were they? Which sounds stupid because we know they were at Bempton, but how would it be possible for them to witness this huge lozenge-shaped object above the derelict buildings? Because we're only looking at 200 yards away, people, from the cliff edge. And, and in the summer, I talk about it on a night being derelict. It is, and desolate. But in the summer months, it's an RSPB. It's a bird sanctuary. They've got a huge gannet colony and puffins and razorbills. So you get a lot of bird spotters up there. Incidentally, anybody who wants to who's pricked their ears up and thought, well, why don't they get pictures? I can tell you they do. Just briefly jump into it. There's a person. I really want them to come forward and tell me more, but they're an artist. That's as close as I'll say, because they're known to area. And they apparently watched for a long time a gold square over the sea dripping light.
God.
That's really weird.
Yeah, a daylight sighting. I know that one RSPB reserve staff with another member of staff, and I'm going back years, and he told me face to face, because he told me other member of staff had left. He even told me where she were working now, and they'd observed a red sphere of light entering the sea. Will they talk about it openly? No. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's lovely to get actual names from the witnesses, but at all times, as you guys know, we've got to respect them. And if I'll push foot name, but I won't push that hard that I've chased people away. They've got my respect and they've got my assurance that full names won't come out. I push and push to get as much information to make it possible for the reader, for the listener to know that I have actually spoke to somebody who works at that particular venue or that. Do you know what I mean? I said, give me something to prove that you were there.
This subject, you've just said it yourself, Paul. People, I mean, it's the conditioning, the brainwashing by the media to make it a mockery. I mean, even when we were younger, it was taboo. But, this is why people are reluctant to come out with encounters as fantastical as they are. And quite rightly, a lot of them do happen. It's just that they haven't got the gumption or the willpower or the nerve to come out with it. But thank goodness for people like you, because of your respected reputation, your incredible integrity. It draws people to you like a magnet, so they come to you to get it off their chest. And I think that's wonderful. I think it's wonderful that that's what is happening, especially with your research and your dedication to the subject. You're enforcing a trust upon them. So the people who felt reluctant to go to the media will come to you so that you can use your integrity to try and find some kind of logical outcome to it. But more than not, there isn't one, is there? Because we're talking about the paranormal.
Well, that's correct. But I try to pack as much information around it as possible. I don't think I've ever come up with an answer to what these people have seen, and to satisfy, I don't know, the public at large. I mean, I've said it before, and I don't know, as researchers of the unexplained, we're kind of a skeptic stroke debunkers. We're just easy. We're an absolute dream scenario because you've got some people within the subject, and I've got nobody in mind to label here, by the way, but you've some people in the subject that will believe absolutely anything and tell you what star system people are coming from and tell you how many species of aliens there is, and that kind of, it ruins it then. Because once that's been said, You've armed these people. You've armed the skeptic. You've armed the debunker, and at the end of the day, when they say to me, "Well, what proof have you got?" and I say, "Well, to be honest with you, I haven't. I haven't got the alien spacecraft with beings sort of waving inside. Hi, Paul. I haven't got that. I haven't got anybody shaking hands with them on the cliff tops. But what I have got." Of very, very genuine people coming forward, telling me their stories, and if all I'm doing is relaying them in the best way possible and packing other stories around them and other strange events, it's just making the cases as, I wouldn't say believable, but as making them as solid as we can.
Yes, and Paul, that is why your books, your Truth Proof series and Night People, for all our listeners out there, if you buy Paul's books, you're in for a treat, because Paul gets to the root of the research. He'll report only what he finds, and it's up to the reader to make up their own conclusions. And it's true to say that, a lot of researchers are still astounded and confused, but we know the phenomena is real. And as you said, the proof is in the truth, and that's the titles of your book, because you take that step further in acknowledging and believing in people, and through photographic and film evidence as well. So I think that's really wonderful. And we're coming to very quickly to the end of the show.
Just want to say to Paul that what you said was absolutely true, because when we look back at people who, I would say respectfully, who are rather gullible, believing these clowns who are suggesting some kind of species, their names, and the hundred of others. I hope to say that Philip and I, like yourself, embrace integrity. I sometimes wonder if they're actually planted to try and create a circus act, whether they are planted and they're not saying it to just come out with all this nonsense of the Draconia star system and the Federation. There is no Federation. I don't believe in a Federation. I think it's nonsense. But what you're dealing with is the very sinister aspects of it. And I think this is where reality comes about for people who believe you, because they were told, that they're all here for world peace and to shake hands. As you said, they are not. We don't believe it at all. There is a sinister aspect, and you yourself, in your wonderful Truth Proof, are illustrating that quite amicably for the people to read. I admire you, Paul.
Well, thank you. And you know, feelings. Honestly, I mean, at the start of the show, I did say, well, this isn't self-praise. I meant what I said. I mean, the feeling's mutual, and it's always good to speak with you guys, you know, and exchange ideas, because I know that you're not living on some other planet in your mind. Like, you know, we kind of feet on ground and level with what we're looking at. I think safest thing we could say is that we know that through personal experience and through speaking to credible people, we know that whatever we're talking about, it is real. There's a reality to what we're talking about. Yes. And as long as we stick with that narrative, I think that we'll always be on the right path.
And I think that is wonderful. And do you know what, Paul? There's a lot of people out there that love you and your work and respect you. And also, just to say that to our listeners, you know, Paul's new book, Truth Proof 4 Beyond Reasonable Doubt. You can get it on paperback and Kindle. I can assure you it's a big book. And it also, Paul is a very talented artist, and he's written the book and illustrated the book, as he has with all his other books. And there's photographic evidence in there as well. Go out and buy it. So, Paul, tell us, how can people get hold of you?
Well, my website is truthproof.uk. And my email address is Paul Sinclair, ILF@gmail.com. Anybody with any reports, if you want to tell me about something but you don't want me to write about it, I'm all ears. You know, so that's where to find me. That's how to get in touch with me. I think my phone number is on the website. So, you know, I'm quite amiable. I talk to people how they talk to me. So you'll be treated with respect and discretion, I can assure you of that. The books are available Kindle on Amazon, and I removed the paperbacks from Amazon a while ago, and they're on the website. And just make your own minds up, people. Look at the reviews and do what you do.
Just to remind the listeners that Paul is a best-selling author. These books are bestsellers. Yes, I beat you to it.
Yeah, you did. I had that in my mind.
Yeah.
I was like, and so, well, Paul, it's been an absolute treat. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, Paul Sinclair is a renowned ufologist, cryptozoologist, and Paul is also involved in many aspects of the paranormal. His books are amazing, and I'm sure we're looking forward to many more books to come. If you don't find him bent over a computer typing, he's out at Bempton researching nearly every night and day. So thank you so much, Paul. It's been a real pleasure to have you on Twin Souls Radio with me and Ronnie.
Well, Ronnie, Philip, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and it's flown.
It has indeed. And
thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much indeed. And you've been listening to Twin Souls in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And we always say to people, keep safe and watch the skies.